Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next Avatar comic review. This is going to be the review for Avatar The Last Airbender North and South Part 1, which is out today, September 14th, Wednesday, in comic book stores. If you've ordered it from Amazon or anywhere like that, or are looking for it in a regular bookstore, you're going to be waiting until at least September 27th for it. Right now, comic book stores, only place to get this at the moment. So, I'm going to start off with some non-spoiler thoughts. I don't have a lot to say non-spoiler wise about the book, so I'll just get those out of the way, and then I'll warn you before I go into the spoiler discussion in case you haven't yet got a chance to read the book. Overall, I think it's a very good book. Though, it suffers like a lot of the part ones do from a kind of slow start. The pacing is just kind of building up to some of the conflict about to happen, and they kind of end up stopping just before they get into the kind of meat of the story. What's here is good. It's just after such a long wait between Smoke and Shadow Part 3 and this, it is frustrating, like really frustrating to just kind of get the book and have it be so good but end just before you really get into the kind of good stuff. And that's like more or less my basic thoughts on this. This is definitely the one where it kind of is most highlighted to me. It's a very focused book, I will say that. Like it's just Water Tribe stuff, and it's like set over like a very kind of short time period, and it means we're allowed to just really in depth get these kind of first moments of Katara and Sokka's return to the South, and that's really what everyone wanted with this. It's so great to finally be back in the South Pole for the first time since they left, basically, at the end of episode 2 of the series. And it definitely comes across like that. There is some real nostalgic moments at the start as they kind of, are reunited with Gran Gran. There's Paku, here are these characters. Here's some characters that were referenced before but we've never actually seen. And just getting Katara and Sokka's reaction to the way the South is at this point in time. Then some of the new characters that are introduced that we've heard from the previews, and stuff is starting to shape up. We know more or less it's going to be a North versus South kind of issue, and the way they approach doing it is interesting. It's kind of subtle at the start, and then they kind of present it much more of an issue, more kind of heavy-handed later on. Not in terms of criticism that it was heavy-handed, but just it's dealt with much more effectively later on, and it's more, as I said, subtle at the start. It's nice to get like Hakoda in like a reasonably main role. Not again, Katara and Sokka are the main characters here. Not Hakoda as much, though he is important. And then obviously some of the other characters towards the end of the book are interesting. But if there's any issue with this, it is just that it stops before anything really happens. And I'm just kind of like, I just really wanted to get into it. And it's frustrating because we're going to have to wait obviously till like January 2017 now for the next part. And that's always been the frustrating part of these books. And especially with the core comics being delayed, we still have a long wait before the next one comes out. So that's more or less all I wanted to say non-spoiler wise. I definitely recommend picking it up, absolutely. It's a new Avatar comic, it's a new canon story, it's really good, the return to the South, and it has a lot of those emotions. Like if you are really hyped up for the return to the South, I think what you get here is good. It's just if you've been really into the comics, the comics take a little bit to get going before they really start kind of getting into the big stuff. Art, I will say, is really, really good. The amount of different like whites, so many shades of blue, because we're in a kind of snowy, icy environment. Most of the characters are wearing different kind of shades of blue, little kind of purples here and there. There's some really, really great art. Like just from this double page spread, you can see like the color of the kind of standing water there, the snow, the ice, the blues the people are wearing. Even the front cover kind of gets that across as well as the back cover. Just really great coloring job to get this across, just with like so few colors, but it look really cool. So there's that. But yeah, I don't have much else to say non-spoiler wise, so I'm going to switch to the spoiler section of the review. So if you really don't want spoilers, please obviously leave the video at this point. So let's get into it. If I had a main frustration with the book, it'd just be that the cover kind of lies to you. Aang is not in this book. You see him in like flashback here and there, like there's a couple of flashback panels to previous comics, but in general, Aang doesn't actually appear in person in this book. It doesn't end with Aang arriving or anything like that. He just doesn't show up in the book. We get a reference to him and that they miss him, but he doesn't actually show up. And it really highlights that the covers are clearly done way before the story is done. I think it's pretty clear probably at this point that what was meant to happen, that there was an initial script for probably this, some of the early planning of this, where Aang would arrive into the Southern Water Tribe towards the end of part 1, and that's what the story would kind of involve. But it seems like obviously there's been some slight changes. I'm just assuming this, of course, and Aang has been kind of pushed back, and obviously they hype up at the end of this book. The hype page for basically North and South Part 2 is Team Avatar is reunited in North and South Part 2. So they're hyping up Part 2 as, Part 1 is Katara Sokka focus, here's everyone arriving. So there's that. So getting into the actual spoilers of this, the big things are obviously the new characters, I'd think. Melina, her brother Malik, Maliq, and then the Southerner Gilak. These are the characters who are kind of forming the plot around. Hakoda is also going to be involved in this as well, because we find out that he has been basically elected the head chieftain of the Southern Water Tribe, which more or less makes him the Southern Water Tribe chief. But as we know, the Southern Chief is a very different type of position to the Northern Chief. The Northern Chief is a royal family, and it's different. Down in the South, it is more of just a kind of, as I said, tribal thing. And that's part of the debate kind of within this book with Gilak and the way he feels the South should be and how its leadership structure should be, versus how Hakoda and him being influenced by Melina and Malik, how they feel the kind of South should be going forward. If I had a main criticism, it would be perhaps that we don't get far enough into like Katara's arc to really speculate a lot about what exactly they're going for exactly. It's clear that she's kind of caught in the middle of this situation, in that Sokka is immediately on the side of like his father, Melina, and they just want to kind of build up the South, progress, the kind of bigger the better, the more like the North the better as far as they're aware. Katara is like, okay, I'm glad my home isn't like a wreck anymore. But she's also kind of like, this doesn't feel like the South anymore. And so as little comments are made here and there, you see her become more and more annoyed with the way kind of Melina's attitude to the South, Malik's attitude to the South, and especially once they meet Gilak and they get his perspective as a Southern patriot, she's kind of like, okay, Gilak is an extremist on the side of the South and really being like just pro-South. But Katara's somewhere in the middle. She thinks Gilak has a point. She sees some benefit to what her father is doing with Melina, but in general, she doesn't really know where to stand on this situation. I think it's clear that what the compromise is going to be, that it's going to have to be a blend of the two. There's an interesting reference later on in the book to the Rift, where this basic problem kind of comes up, and they're and they both have to kind of bond over the fact that, like Sokka says, it's just progress. This just looks like progress to me. And Katara remembers this progress, this is just like what happened with, and we get 2 flashback pages to the Rift, of Aang, obviously, and the Air Acolytes coming across the, obviously, important site for the Air Nomads, now with this kind of factory town built over it. And how Aang felt there, and the compromise that they made over the course of the Rift, and Katara is kind of having to accept that something along those lines is going to have to happen with her and her home. It was never going to just remain the same as it was. Um, but it's clear from the dream that she has at the very start of this book that she expected it to be more built up. Like this is basically in this early flashback. This is what she expected her home to be like. Very different to the Southern Water Tribe we see at the start of the series, but much more similar to the way it is just prior to the attack that leads to the death of Katara's mother. Um, that's what she expects, but obviously when they arrive and it's actually like giant buildings, it is the North Mark II, you can see where her problem kind of comes in. That she's been absent from the tribe for, like 2 going on 3 years, and she returns and it's just a completely different village city. And the other side of this is Melina. So let me show you what she looks like actually while we're here. So that's what Melina looks like for anyone wondering. And yeah, she doesn't really come across as like villainous. She's very kind of enthusiastic, like, okay, like we're here, we think things should be more like this, the North, but they don't come across overly that way. It's just a few comments that they make where they're like, I wish things were more like the North because we really like the rules and regulations. And they make a comment about the food and that, like, until this northern restaurant opened up, I was struggling with the food down here because it was like the food from the North, but it was just a bit off. And Katara takes a little bit of offense to that because isn't that the whole point? We are not the same tribe. The North and the South are different. We have a different culture, different types of food. It's not meant to be the case that the South just has the same food as the North. It's meant to be different. And Melina kind of struggling to see that. That the approach of Melina, Malik, and influencing Hakoda is that they can't quite see that the South is gradually turning into another version of the North. And that's the problem. That's why Gilak has all these people supporting him as a kind of patriot for the South, and why Katara's become frustrated. Sokka, it makes sense that he's supportive of all this progress because he's all about, technology advancement, that sort of thing. That's what we've seen. But it's obviously going to be the blend and what exactly happens here. So yeah, the main plot revolves around the fact that the next plan for something to be built in the Southern Water Tribe is that there are blueprints for the Southern Water Tribe Palace, which is going to be where Hakoda, as the current chief of the South, is going to reside. And before these can be built, they are stolen by these 2 kids, and the kind of incident that gets them stolen leads to Melina being knocked out, and Katara and Sokka go in pursuit, and as they chase these 2 kids, they chase them back to the hideout where Gilak and all the Southern Patriots are. So Gilak, let me just find the page with him. You can see him there on the bottom. He is basically one of the men who was under Hakoda's command during the war. He has a lot of respect for Hakoda. He has a lot of respect for Katara and Sokka for what they did in the war. One of the big things you get throughout the book is that most people in the South and the North that now live in the South, when they see Katara and Sokka, they're treated like heroes. They know them. They're celebrities to everyone. And that's a really big thing, that they return to their home expecting it to be the kind of small home they're used to, and they're suddenly being treated like celebrities. Things change when Gilak reveals that he thought it would be great when Hakoda was elected chief, but the direction that he's taking things as a leader is not something that he really likes, because obviously Hakoda is now wanting to involve the North. He has invited people from the North and other nations to come down to the South and help things out. Whereas Gilak is kind of like, he has this perspective on the nations where, while traveling the world with your father, I realized that the strong cultures, the Fire Nation and the Earth Kingdom, value power over cooperation. Their societies are organized around a single powerful leader, and then they're dealing with other nations, they think first about power. And he talks about the fact that the South has always been egalitarian, treating all of the different chieftains that they have as equals, and they've paid for it because, from his perspective, they've had all these kind of small, scattered leaders who kind of work in a council, when they'd have so much more power on a world stage if they just had one leader, like the Northern Water Tribe. And he makes a comment about the fact that, look at the air nomads, they were the most egalitarian of all of the nations, and now they've been wiped off the face of the earth. And Katara just has a kind of interesting expression, I can't believe that you said that. And she's obviously thinking a little bit about Aang. They don't go more into it than that, but stuff like if Aang meets Gilak and he says something about the air nomads, that's going to be a conversation, and where we go from there. He tries to kidnap them once it kind of comes across that they just are trying to get the blueprints back, and they don't really agree with the fact that Gilak is effectively preparing for war if he doesn't get what he wants. They manage to get themselves out, obviously, because Katara is super skilled, Sokka's skilled as well, and we're just left in this situation where these kind of southern kind of loyalists are out there, and they're preparing something, and Katara is stuck in this situation where she knows Gilak has a point, but if she sides with Gilak, she'd be opposing her father and Melina, who is nice, even if she kind of ends up kind of almost by mistake making these comments about negative comments about the South. The end of the comic is a cliffhanger in that Melina is obviously knocked out and is brought to a room to recover, and they return back unable to get the blueprints, but kind of wanting to report about Gilak. They go into the room, they walk in, and they find Hakoda kissing Melina. Clearly, basically retroactively saying that there's been a relationship between those two in the background for a while since Melina has arrived, and it is full-on romantic now. We don't get any reactions beyond the fact that obviously Katara and Sokka have just kind of walked in on their father kissing someone else, but it's going to present some interesting ideas in that this is a book where we start off with Katara having a dream that involves her mother, and now her father is apparently moving on, which I think is fine, but is obviously going to be something they bring up, I assume. And then if this ends up being a proper relationship that sticks around and Melina doesn't turn out to be evil and they kind of break them up, that's going to be interesting how they do that, with Katara and Sokka having a new kind of mother-in-law, effectively. Again, there's not a lot to go on beyond that. They don't really overly present Melina in a kind of overly manipulative kind of manner. It's just that it seems like she has a good relationship with Hakoda, and he's maybe overly listening to her, overly relying on what she's saying to make his decisions, which is why he's more on the side of what the North are doing, as opposed to maybe having a balance between some progress and then respecting some of the wishes of the Southerners who wish to kind of keep the South different to the North. So, as I said, this video is only going to be my initial thoughts. I've only really read the book once, so I'll have more thoughts. I'll probably do another video later on in the week. And of course, I'll have my written review out in the next couple of days. I'll try and get it out tonight, but I'm not overly sure if that will happen. The other thing where you'll find coverage of this is that on Sunday, on the weekend, we'll have our big podcast review where we'll be going through this book page by page, analysing it. So definitely keep your eye out on my channel and Avatar The Last Airbender online.com, and you'll find more coverage of this book. But in short, I think it's good. There's some stuff definitely to get into, but maybe not as much as you think. It is a part one, and it doesn't really do anything overly different than the other part ones in terms of structure, but there's some great stuff in here with the nostalgia returning to the South. So yeah, they're my final thoughts for now, initial thoughts. But yeah, it's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.